In today's video, the curious incident of the man in the nighttime. Guy pretending to work at resort we're staying at tries to enter our cabin. I ramble a lot so this might be unnecessarily long, but I think it has a worthy ending, so stay with me here, if you please. My creepy encounter occurred on the suburban outskirts of a major city in the early 00s. I believe I was nearly 13 at this time, and from a very small town myself, but my parents were divorced and I was spending a weekend with my father several hours away from home. He had remarried a lovely woman with a teenage son who had special needs, and had moved into her house. My stepmother was the sort of warm-hearted person who was always helping others out, so her home was a bit of a landing pad for those in need of a place to stay. I'd met at least 3 friends and relatives who lived with her temporarily during my irregular visits, so I'd become somewhat accustomed to the idea of people coming and going around the house. Even though we were in a suburban area, I found the city nerve-wracking. I'd grown up in very small towns, the sort of places where I'd come and go more or less as I pleased, my father always telling me to be cautious here, not letting me go for walks without a huge mag light to pummel would-be accosters with, etc., kind of freaked me out. The front door of the house opened to a short hallway, and the right side opened out onto sort of a den, which is where I had the misfortune of sleeping. The proximity to the door made me feel nervous and a little exposed, but hey, the city was weird for me. I was aware that I was being a little nervous and neurotic. We were having a late night in, and had ordered a surfeit of Chinese food to fuel us through long movies. It was probably closing on 2 a.m. when the adults retired to their bedroom, which was far on the other side of the house. Through the entry hall, across a huge open living room, and down another hallway. I slept on the couch in the den, which gave me a clear view of the door some 15 feet away. A dim light was on, washing the walls with enough light to see. I fell asleep. And then, presumably not too much later, I woke up. I heard a sound, and this was just my worst flipping nightmare. The door handle was turning, rattling. Surely it had been locked. I had been dead asleep fractions of a second before, now racing to process the situation. The door opened suddenly, and someone was coming through. I pulled my blankets over my head as much as possible, otherwise paralyzed with fear, but could still peek out. A man who looked to be about 30 stood in the entryway, and far from creeping in, he made his entrance very confidently, closing the door behind him and paying me absolutely no mind. By this point, we were firmly in creepy encounter territory, but I was at war with myself. Even in this situation, I was not one to come to split judgments, so while I was horrified that this was happening, I also wasn't sure he hadn't had a key, rattling at the door as he had. Was this visitor someone my stepmom knew? I was trying to rationalize this, in part because I couldn't think of any better options. We didn't have cell phones, and I couldn't get to my father's room without exposing myself fully. In retrospect, I could have gone out the front door, but I was frozen with fear and uncertainty. The man himself didn't seem menacing, outside of his unexpected entrance in the middle of the night. But I remained on high alert as he walked down the hallway, and heard him shortly thereafter in the kitchen, which shared a wall with the den and opened to it via a door that was currently closed. He was effectively behind me. I turned to face the wall, and listened to every sound so carefully, I could almost see what he was doing. He opened a drawer and fished out silverware. I heard the cabinet open, the ceramic clink of a plate sliding out. Now I was really unsure if our visitor was a friend, since he didn't seem to have any trouble finding his way around. A short pause, some shuffling, and I hear slurping. Apparently we left the Chinese food out. I'm listening to this man eat lo mein. What the heck kind of home invasion is this? I am agonizing over how boxed in I feel, terrified to leave the den, but the ridiculousness of this has made me uncertain. And at this point, it all gets very fuzzy for me. I feel like I saw his face again, then his eyes passed over me, perhaps as he went back out the front door, but I can't be sure that isn't my mind trying to fill in missing details. I definitely fell back asleep. I know. I would definitely die in a horror movie. I really can't explain my actions here, and I cringe more than a little bit looking back. Maybe I forgot it had happened. Maybe I thought it was a dream. Whatever I was or wasn't thinking, I didn't wake up again. I slept well into daylight. That morning, my father told me he had quite the story. Around 6, he heard something outside and went to investigate. I think he might have gone out through the garage door, not disturbing me. He found a man outside in the driveway, washing his truck without soap or water and scratching the finish. I guess something about the encounter gave him pause too, because he approached the man carefully and tried to talk to him. Bonus points if you remember my stepbrother was a special needs kid. It was obvious to my dad that this man had some kind of intellectual disability. He called the police to get him some help. I don't remember the details, but the poor guy was out and about somehow, couldn't get himself home and didn't know he needed assistance. I don't know if he had just gone house to house trying doors, but somehow he ended up at ours. And we had forgotten to lock the door. My dad emphasized how grateful he was, that he felt it was not coincidence he'd ended up at this house. Someone else easily could have shot the man. This explained a lot about why I was so scared when he came in, but I also read no ill intent in him. I told my dad, "Oh yeah. He came into the house in the middle of the night and was eating Chinese food." He balked and demanded to know why I didn't wake him up. I explained on the one hand I didn't feel like I could get to the bedroom safely, and on the other, I wasn't even convinced he was an intruder. I felt like a bit of an idiot, but my instincts weren't entirely wrong, and fortunately neither were my father's, or this story might have had a very different ending. So, for clarification, this was back in 2014, during the summer after The Purge came out, which will be relevant information later. My dad, little brother, 11, neighbor, 11, and I, 15, were staying at a cabin for a week during our summer break to go fishing etc. On our third night staying there, around 11 p.m., some guy comes up and knocks on our door asking if we could jump his car, because apparently the battery had died while he was driving by. So my dad agreed to help him but told us to call the cops if he wasn't back in 20 minutes because our cabin was in the middle of the woods and he would have had no reason to even be that far down the road unless he was intentionally on his way to our cabin. 30 minutes pass and my dad gets back, says the guy was asking a bunch of weird questions about how many of us were staying and such, but that he just jump-started his car and the guy left. 2 nights later my brother, neighbor and I are up late watching TV in the living room. At some point around 1 a.m. a different guy shows at our cabin, wearing the resort's logo and uniform with the resort official car, and just stares into our cabin from the porch. He didn't knock or anything so we have no idea how long he was standing there, but at some point my neighbor had noticed him staring in at us and jumped up and ran over to the bedroom to wake up my dad. So my dad, annoyed at this point, walks up to the door, while not opening it, and asks the guys what he's doing here, and he says he got a call from the reception desk that our TV wasn't working and he was here to fix it. Meanwhile, our TV was obviously working since he saw us watching stuff on it for who knows how long. Anyways, my dad tells him we don't need anything and he should leave. The guy then proceeds to say we're out of toilet paper and he needs to refill it for us. Again, my dad says we don't need any and that the guy should leave. He continues to get ruder and ruder, asking about towels, our phones, and other stuff he could possibly refill or fix, but eventually leaves. The next morning we call the reception desk to report this because this guy was obviously out of line. They tell us that they don't send out anyone that late anymore for services for the cabins, and that must have been a mistake. So they ask us to describe the guy, about 55 years old, tall, light blonde/grayish hair, blue eyes, and when we do, they tell us that nobody with that description works there. So at this point we're all extremely freaked out and trying to figure out who the hell he was and why he was there. Turns out that same weekend, there had been hundreds of people across the country attempting to recreate a real-life purge. We don't know for sure if that's what his intentions were, but I'm assuming the first guy, the one with the car problem asking weird questions, was there to scope out our situation possibly, and when he saw it was just one adult with 3 kids, he relayed it to his partner, the second guy, that we'd be a good cabin to rob, hurt, etc. I'm just happy my dad never unlocked our door for the fake resort guy, cause who knows why he went through all that effort to pretend to work there.